Welcome back, deep divers. You know where we are. Occult Archives, of course. The part of the show where we kind of roll up our sleeves and get our hands a little bit dirty with some of history's most, let's say, thought-provoking books. You know, those volumes that people tend to talk about in hushed tones, the ones that have inspired a fair share of awe, but also, maybe a little bit of fear.
Right, yeah. A healthy dose of apprehension. I'd say that comes with the territory, wouldn't you?
Definitely. Definitely. And for our 71st deep dive, and that's a lot of dives, we're turning our attention to a work from the early 1800s, a rather ambitious undertaking, I'd say. Francis Barrett's The Magus.
Ah, yes. The Magus, a classic.
Today, we'll be focusing specifically on book one of this, what Barrett himself called a complete system of occult philosophy.
Quite a claim, isn't it? Complete system. It always makes me wonder, what did complete even mean back then?
That's a good question. I mean, the Magus itself, even just the title, it kind of conjures into these images, right? Arcane rituals, hidden knowledge, that kind of thing.
It does, doesn't it? Published in 1801, I think it really tapped into that fascination with the occult that was, well, kind of bubbling beneath the surface back then.
It really did. And it delivered. The Magus is dense. I mean, it covers natural magic, the whole system of talismans, even alchemy.
A real buffet of occult thought.
Exactly. And for our listeners, for those who might be intrigued by the Magus, who want to dive in, but maybe, just maybe, feel a little daunted by its sheer size.
Oh, I can definitely understand that. It's a lot to take in, for sure.
Yeah. So what we're going to do today, we're going to try to illuminate some of the key ideas, the most captivating concepts in book one, sort of like a guided tour through this complex landscape.
I like that, a guided tour, because we're not aiming to cover every single detail. We're going to hit the highlights, the things that really make the Magus so unique and so influential.
Right. So we'll be unpacking some of Barrett's most interesting and perhaps even surprising beliefs. Like, did you know he argued that magic, at its core, is inherently good?
Oh, yeah. That's one of the things that always strikes me about Barrett. He's trying to reclaim the idea of magic, to distance it from those negative associations that have kind of built up over the centuries.
Yeah. Witchcraft, sorcery, all that.
Exactly. He wants to present magic as a path to wisdom, even as a source of genuine happiness.
And he goes even further, right? He connects the word magic directly to the Magi, the wise men who, in the biblical narrative, visit the newborn Christ.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. He's not talking about shadowy figures hiding in the dark. He's linking magic to these figures of wisdom and reverence.
And to drive the point home, he even argues that the root of magic is found in Scripture. He actually quotes a passage, "The fear of God is the beginning of all wisdom."
Powerful stuff. So right from the start, Barrett is reframing the whole conversation about magic. He's not talking about wielding supernatural powers for selfish ends.
No, not at all. In fact, he even says that charity is the ultimate goal of magic, like the true end that a magician should strive for.
It's this idea that magic, when practiced correctly, is a force for good. It's about spiritual insight and helping others.
Okay, so we've got these lofty ideals, but then Barrett gets into the nitty-gritty. He dives deep into the practical applications, like, for example, talismans.
Talismans, yes, those objects imbued with, let's say, special powers.
Exactly. Now, we've all heard of talismans, but what exactly did Barrett think they were? What gave them their power?
Right. So Barrett spends a lot of time explaining how talismans are created. And it's not just about, carving a symbol onto a piece of metal or something.
No, it's much more intricate than that, right?
It is. Timing is crucial, he says.
Yeah.
You have to align the creation of a talisman with specific celestial configurations, the constellations, the positions of the planets, even the exact time of day.
So it's like you're trying to capture a specific energy from the cosmos.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Barrett believed that by aligning the creation of the talisman with these cosmic events, you could imbue it with certain powers. And he's very specific about the details. He gives precise instructions for all of this.
It sounds almost like a science, like a celestial science.
There's definitely that element to it, this meticulous, almost mathematical approach. And here's another important point. Barrett believed that the individual's own spirit played a vital role in all of this. Like, you weren't just passively receiving cosmic energies, you were actively channeling them into the talisman.
So it was a collaboration, in a sense.
Yeah.
Between the magician and the cosmos.
Exactly. He also talks a lot about the concepts of sympathy and antipathy. The idea that certain things in the universe naturally attract or repel each other.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
Oh,
So the talisman, when properly created, could harness these forces, these sympathies and antipathies, to achieve a desired effect.
that's it. And Barrett provides some pretty striking examples of this, like he talks about using seals, rings, and amulets to heal people at a distance.
Healing at a distance. Now that sounds pretty far out there. Did Barrett actually claim to have witnessed this kind of thing himself?
He did. He even describes instances where he believed he'd seen these effects in action. And it wasn't just healing. He also talks about methods of communication and even receiving intimations of the future through dreams.
Dreams as a window into the future. That's a common theme in a lot of occult traditions.
It is, and Barrett clearly subscribed to that belief. He also discusses ancient methods for invoking astral spirits, which involve things like magical circles, crystals, and specific rituals.
Okay, so we're talking about some pretty heavy stuff here. And Barrett wasn't just making this up, was he? He draws on a long tradition of magical thought, right?
Absolutely. He cites all sorts of authorities from throughout history: Zoroaster, Hermes Trismegistus, Apollonius of Tyana, Simon Magus. The list goes on and on.
So he's situating himself within this lineage of thinkers who have explored these realms. It's like he's saying, look, I'm not the first to talk about these things. These ideas have been around for centuries.
Right. He's building on a foundation laid by others.
Okay, so we've covered the foundations of natural magic, the celestial mechanics of talismans. And now Barrett takes us into what he calls the wonders of natural magic, with a focus on sympathetic and occult operations. And I have a feeling things are about to get a little weird.
Oh, yeah. We're definitely getting to some more unusual territory here. This is where Barrett really dives into the concept of sympathetic resonance, and he starts with what he calls animal magic.
Animal magic. Okay, that sounds promising.
Right. So one example he gives is the idea that cutting a lemon while uttering hateful words can cause anguish in someone far away.
Okay, so like a sympathetic link between the lemon and the person.
Exactly. And it gets even more intense. He talks about cutting a live pigeon's heart to affect the heart of a distant person.
Whoa. That's pretty graphic.
Right.
And again, I just want to remind our listeners that we're exploring Barrett's ideas here, not necessarily endorsing them.
Of course, of course. But it's important to understand the kind of worldview that Barrett was operating within. A world where these connections between seemingly disparate things were seen as real and powerful.
Right. He also mentions things like inducing fear in someone by suspending a magical image, or even causing death through similar means.
Yeah, all based on this principle of fatal and magical sympathy.
Right.
And again, these are claims that Barrett makes. We're not saying they're true, but they're certainly fascinating.
They are, and it's not all dark and intense. Barrett also talks about simpler animal remedies, things like using hare's fat to remove thorns or toadstones for toothaches.
Ah, yes, the toad. It seems to have held a special place in this system of natural magic.
It does, doesn't it? Barrett and other writers he cites believe that the toad, despite its unappealing appearance, was a powerful source of healing.
Like it was divinely ordained to be a remedy, even though most people find toads, kind of repulsive.
Yeah, it's interesting how these seemingly random associations, like toad and healing, were seen as meaningful. And it wasn't just animals. Plants played a big role too.
Right. Barrett gives examples of using herbs for all sorts of purposes, like holding a specific plant to prevent someone from leaving, or steeping certain herbs in water to heal wounds.
He even mentions the acerbaca leaf, which, depending on how you pluck it, upward or downward, can either cause vomiting or purging.
That's a good example of the sympathetic principle in action, the direction of the plucking mirroring the desired bodily function.
Exactly. And then there's the sapphire. Barrett claims it can draw poison from a plague tumor. It's really a blend of practical folk remedies and what we would now consider, magical thinking.
It is. It gives us a glimpse into a worldview where the lines between medicine, magic, and natural philosophy were much blurrier than they are today.
Okay, so moving on. Barrett talks about amulets, charms, and enchantments. And he defines the instrument of enchanters in a rather striking way.
He calls it the pure, living, breathing spirit of the blood.
Wow. Okay, so the magician's own vital force is key to the effectiveness of these enchantments.
That's the idea. And he describes charming as essentially binding through words. Words that possess a special kind of virtue. Words that can even, he claims, subvert the natural order of things.
Subvert nature. So we're talking about causing earthquakes or storms just by speaking.
That's what he suggests, yes. He's not shy about making bold claims. And he's very clear that the words themselves are crucial. They have to be significative of the operator's will.
So it's not just about saying the right words, it's about the intention behind them.
Exactly. Barrett says you need vehement and intent desire when you're speaking these words of power. And get this, he even claims to be able to send words over vast distances without any physical means.
Like telepathy almost.
Yeah, something like that. He also touches on the phenomenon of receiving words in dreams, which he attributes to spiritual or occult causes. And he even shares a personal anecdote about predicting an administration change several days before it happened, all based on a dream.
Always good to have a personal story to back up your claims. And then he talks about enchantments related to more everyday things like love and hatred, which, he says, operate through a magical sympathy above the power of reasoning.
Right. So it's this idea that these basic human emotions can be manipulated through magical means, bypassing logic and reason.
Okay, so next up we've got the virtues of precious stones. This seems to be a continuation of the idea that there are inherent powers within the natural world, but now we're focusing on minerals.
Exactly. Barrett believed that precious stones inherit their virtues from celestial influences, all filtered through what he calls the soul or spirit of the world. And while he acknowledges that some authors disagree about the existence of these occult virtues, he's pretty adamant that they're real.
So each stone is like a little conduit for cosmic energy.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And he provides a whole catalog of stones and their associated virtues, like atites and oculus solis are good for epilepsy and eyesight, while carbuncles protect against poisons in the air.
Some of these associations are pretty interesting, like the iris stone is said to represent a rainbow, which is kind of poetic.
Yeah. And then there's the heliotropium, which is linked to constancy, fame, long life, and even invisibility when combined with the right herb.
Wow. And let's not forget the jacinth for warding off poisons and attracting wealth and pleasantness. It sounds like a pretty good deal.
Right. And then there's the pyrophilus for protection and renown, and the pantara, which is supposed to attract other stones and counter poisons.
It's a whole system of, well, almost like a gemstone astrology. And it really highlights this idea that the physical world is infused with celestial energies, that a stone is more than just, a lump of rock.
Exactly. It has a deeper meaning, a connection to the cosmos.
Okay, and now for the really weird stuff. Barrett has a section called Mixtures of Natural Things and Monstrous Animals. I'm almost afraid to ask, but what's going on here?
Well, this is where Barrett gets into the idea that magicians can combine different natural elements to create seemingly unnatural effects. Like they can gather dispersed virtues from various sources and concentrate them into new forms.
Okay, so like alchemy, but with animals.
Sort of.
Yeah.
He talks about a double virtue that comes from mixing things. There's the celestial virtue, which is inherent in the natural element, and then there's an artificial virtue, which is achieved by combining things in accordance with specific constellations.
So it's all about harnessing these cosmic influences.
Right, and he mentions something called a common form that results from these mixtures, but he says he'll explain that more in book 2.
Ah, the classic cliffhanger. But what about the monstrous animals? What's all that about?
Well, Barrett references this book called A Book of the Laws of Cluedo, which he says deals with monstery generations that go against the laws of nature. And then he gives some pretty wild examples. Like he says that worms can turn into gnats, horses into wasps, and a calf or ox into bees.
Hold on, wait a minute. A horse into wasps. How is that even possible?
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre. And it gets even stranger. He talks about crabs turning into scorpions, ducks into frogs or toads, and basil into scorpions.
Basil into scorpions. That's
Yeah.
just crazy.
I know, right? And then he mentions menstruous hair-breeding serpents and horsehair turning into some kind of pernicious worm.
Okay, I think we're officially in the realm of, well, let's just say questionable claims.
Yeah, I think questionable is a good word for it. But then he drops this bombshell. He claims to know of a way to generate a human-like form, the mandrake, from a hen sitting on eggs.
The mandrake. Of course, that mythical plant with a human-shaped root. Always a crowd pleaser.
Right. And he says this mandrake has all sorts of wonderful virtues.
So yeah, I think it's safe to say that this section pushes the boundaries of what we might consider natural.
It does. But again, it's important to remember the context. Barrett believed in a world where the boundaries between species were much more fluid, where the very laws of nature could be manipulated through magical means.
Okay, so finally, we arrive at the jewel of alchemy, probably the most well-known aspect of the occult. What's Barrett's take on this grand touchstone of natural wisdom?
Well, for Barrett, alchemy is the real deal. He says it's divinely inspired, brought down from heaven by the angel Uriel himself.
Okay, so no pressure or anything.
Right, and he immediately brings up Zoroaster, the founder of Zoroastrianism, as the first philosopher by fire. He credits Zoroaster with all sorts of alchemical feats, like creating pure gold and even making the sun brighter.
Zoroaster the alchemist. That's an interesting connection.
It is. And Barrett goes on to say that Zoroaster was the first to engrave the pure Kabbalah on gold. The Kabbalah, as you know, is this mystical Jewish tradition that deals with hidden meanings in scripture and the nature of divine emanations. And a lot of occultists, including Barrett, integrated Kabbalistic ideas into their systems.
Right. So alchemy for Barrett is not just about, turning lead into gold. It's got this deeper spiritual dimension.
Exactly. And he rattles off a list of famous alchemical writers: Hermes Trismegistus, Geber, Artephius, Bacon, Helmont, Lully, Basil Valentine, the all-stars.
And then he gets a little cheeky, doesn't he? He ranks them in terms of clarity, with Flamel being the best of the bunch. But then he says that his own instructions are even better for actually obtaining gold.
Yeah, he's not lacking in confidence, is he?
Not at all. But he does seem to genuinely believe that becoming an adept is possible, and that it's directly tied to the spiritual quest of seeking the kingdom of God.
And he emphasizes the importance of the Kabbalah in all of this. He says that through the Kabbalah, we can gain true knowledge, which leads to becoming children of God and adepts in wisdom.
So it's all interconnected. The physical transformation of alchemy mirroring the spiritual transformation of the individual.
That's a key idea in alchemy, for sure. And Barrett talks about the Rosicrucian belief that virtue flies from no man. He lists the virtues of an adept: wisdom, charity, love, mercy, faith, and constancy. And he defines an adept as someone who studies God's will, prays for wisdom, and meditates on the true aqua vita, which leads to spiritual insight and abundance.
That sounds like a pretty demanding path.
It does, but Barrett seems to think it's worth it. He even mentions Helmont's claim that he actually saw and handled the Philosopher's Stone, which was said to be the key to alchemical transmutation. And he contrasts that with Kircher's skepticism, who thought the whole idea was just a simple chemical process.
So Barrett is clearly on the side of the believers.
He is, and he ends this section by encouraging the reader to study his treatise carefully, saying that it holds the key to achieving their wished-for end.
Which presumably is both material and spiritual transformation.
That's the goal, to become a true adept in both the physical and spiritual sense.
Well, we've only just scratched the surface of the Magus, haven't we? Even
Yeah.
just book one.
Not even close. We haven't even talked about the celestial intelligencer, the elements, the spirit of the world, seals, perfumes, magical rings, the influence of the stars on the mind, mathematical knowledge, the virtues of numbers, the scales of unity, images, or imprecations.
It's a lot. It's really a whole universe of occult thought.
It is. And I think it leaves us with a question for you, our listener. How do these ancient beliefs about interconnectedness, celestial influence, and the power of intentions sit with you today? Do they resonate, or do they seem completely foreign?
Yeah. Think about it. This idea that everything is connected, that the stars influence our lives, that our thoughts and words have real power. These are ideas that have been around for a long time. And maybe, just maybe, there's something to them.
Maybe. But even if you don't buy into all of it, I think there's something valuable in exploring these ideas, in trying to understand how people in the past saw the world. And who knows, maybe you'll find something that resonates with you, something that sparks your own curiosity.
Exactly. And if this little glimpse into the Magus has intrigued you, I encourage you to dive in yourself. There's a whole world of wonder waiting to be discovered. And maybe, just maybe, you'll uncover some of those secrets too dangerous to be read.
Just be careful out there, deep divers. You never know what you might find.